Orven had always suspected that if something extraordinary were going to happen to him, it would do so at the worst possible time, preferably when he was halfway inside a maintenance shaft with a tool clenched between his teeth and a panel refusing to cooperate out of pure spite. The station around him hummed with its usual tired rhythm, like an old machine that had decided to keep working simply because stopping would require effort. He tapped the side of the faulty circuit with the back of his wrench and muttered something deeply unflattering about whoever designed it, which in his experience could be anyone from a long-dead engineer to an algorithm with a questionable sense of humor. The panel flickered, dimmed, then finally obeyed him with a reluctant spark. Orven leaned back, satisfied in the quiet way one feels after winning an argument with inanimate objects. He pulled the wrench from his mouth and exhaled, only then realizing how still the corridor had become. The station was never truly silent, but this was close enough to make his shoulders tense. He slid out of the shaft and stood, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeves. "All right," he said to no one in particular. "If something is about to go wrong, now would be a very predictable moment." It happened immediately, which was frankly rude. The lights didn't flicker dramatically. There was no alarm. Just a shift. Subtle, like the station had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. Then she was there. Orven didn't see her arrive. One moment the corridor was empty, the next it wasn't. She stood several steps away, perfectly still, her presence so precise it felt intentional, like she had placed herself into the scene rather than entered it. Pale skin, almost reflective in the dim light, and ears that extended longer than any human's, tapering into delicate points that seemed too sharp to be decorative. Her eyes settled on him with a focus that made him briefly consider whether he had accidentally become important. "Well," Orven said after a moment, because silence had never been his strength, "this feels like a conversation I was not invited to prepare for." She did not respond. Instead, she moved. It was not fast in the way people describe speed. It was efficient. One instant she was standing still. The next Orven found himself pressed against the wall, his back meeting cold metal with a force that was firm but not careless. Her hand held him there with unsettling ease, fingers curled just enough to suggest that resisting would be both pointless and embarrassing. "Okay," he said, blinking as he tried to catch up with reality. "Before we continue, I'd like to note that I have done nothing illegal today, or at least nothing I got caught doing." Her gaze did not waver. Up close, her features were even more striking, almost human, but not quite aligned with expectation. Too precise, too still, like a sculpture that had decided to breathe. She leaned closer. Orven felt the shift in air before he understood what was happening. Her focus dropped to his neck, and something in her expression changed. Not softer, not kinder, but sharper, like a decision forming. "Ah," he said carefully. "If this is about the maintenance schedule, I can explain." Her lips parted slightly, revealing teeth that were just a little too perfect, a little too pointed. "Right," Orven added, "or we can skip straight to the part where I regret all my life choices." He considered struggling. It lasted less than a second. Her grip made it clear that this would not be a fair competition, and Orven had always believed in picking battles he could at least pretend to win. Her face moved closer to his neck. For a brief, unreasonable moment, Orven thought about his grandfather. The old man had always been vague in a way that felt deliberate, offering advice that sounded like jokes until they weren't. "If anyone ever looks at your neck like it's a solution," he had once said, "try to leave the room." Orven had not been given that option. "Just to clarify," he said quickly, "this is not how I imagined my evening going." Her breath brushed against his skin, then she froze. It wasn't hesitation, it was interruption, like something had reached into the moment and pressed pause. Her eyes fixed on the side of his neck, not where his pulse was strongest, not where it would have made sense to focus, but slightly above it, where the faint lines of a small, intricate tattoo rested just beneath the collar of his uniform. Orven followed her gaze as much as he could without moving. "Oh," he said, as if remembering something mildly inconvenient. "That." Her hand loosened. Not much. Just enough for the pressure to shift, for the certainty in her posture to fracture. She leaned back slightly, her expression changing in a way Orven could not immediately understand. It wasn't hunger anymore. It was recognition. "No," she said softly, though the word carried a weight that made it feel less like a denial and more like a contradiction of reality itself. "That cannot be," Orven blinked. "I feel like I should be more concerned about that sentence." She stepped back. The movement was sudden, almost abrupt, as if proximity itself had become a mistake. Her eyes remained on him, on the mark, her focus so intense it made him instinctively reach up and touch the side of his neck. "It's just a tattoo," he said, attempting reassurance. "Family tradition. Very exclusive. Only available to confused grandchildren." Her gaze snapped to his face. "Where did you get it?" "From my grandfather," Orven replied, because that was the truth, though it sounded less helpful every time he said it. He insisted it was important. Wouldn't say why. He also insisted I learn how to cook, so I assumed his priorities were questionable. She did not react to the attempt at humor. Instead, she took another step back, creating distance as if it were necessary to think. Her expression shifted again, the sharp certainty replaced by something far more unsettling. Uncertainty. Orven pushed himself off the wall slowly, testing whether she would stop him. She didn't. "That's new," he said. "Usually when someone tries to bite me, they don't reconsider halfway through." Her eyes flicked briefly to his throat, then away again, as if the sight had become complicated. "You should not have that mark," she said. Orven tilted his head. "I've had it for years. It would be impressive if I only just noticed." She ignored him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The station hummed again, the normal rhythm creeping back into the silence, as if reality had decided to resume its duties. Orven cleared his throat. "So," he said, gesturing vaguely between them, "is this the part where you explain why you almost killed me and then decided not to? Or do we skip ahead to the part where I pretend this is normal and go back to work?" She studied him. Not as prey, not anymore. Something else. "That mark," she said quietly, "should not exist on you." Orven gave a small, helpless shrug. "You'd be surprised how often that comes up today." The corridor did not return to normal so much as it pretended to, which Orven found deeply unconvincing. The lights hummed again, the distant engines resumed their steady vibration, and somewhere far off, a cargo latch slammed with the kind of indifference only machinery could manage. None of it changed the fact that a few seconds ago, he had nearly been bitten by someone who now stood a careful distance away, looking at him like he had personally offended the structure of the universe. Orven adjusted his collar, though it did nothing to hide the mark. "So," he said, because silence had clearly not worked before, "you've decided not to kill me. I appreciate that. It's a strong start to any professional relationship." She did not respond immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on his neck, then shifted to his face, as if trying to reconcile the two into something that made sense. "You are telling the truth," she said at last. Orven blinked. "That is an oddly specific accusation." "I do not sense deception," she continued, her tone almost reluctant. "You do not understand what you carry." "Correct," Orven said. "I also don't understand why this station's coffee tastes like it was filtered through regret, but I still drink it." Her expression did not change, though something in her posture tightened, like she was resisting the urge to react. "That mark," she said, stepping slightly closer again, though not nearly as close as before, "is older than your kind's presence beyond your own world." Orven folded his arms, more out of habit than confidence. "That would be impressive, considering my kind only recently figured out how to keep plants alive on ships." "You should not exist with it," she added, quieter now. "That feels like a broader issue," Orven replied. "We might need to narrow that down." For a moment, she simply stared at him. Then, unexpectedly, she moved past him. Orven turned, watching as she walked a few steps down the corridor, then stopped. She did not leave. She just stood there, as if distance alone might help her think. "Well," Orven said, gesturing slightly, "if you're done not killing me, I do have a job I was technically in the middle of." She did not answer. He hesitated, then cautiously moved back toward the maintenance panel. Every step felt like an experiment. When she didn't react, he crouched and pulled the panel open again, though his attention remained divided. "So," he said, reaching inside and adjusting a connection that no longer needed adjusting, "you're going to stand there, or—" "I am considering," she replied. "That sounds dangerous," Orven said. "For me." Her gaze flicked to him again, sharper now. "For both of us." Orven paused. "That is significantly less comforting." Silence settled again, though this time it felt different. Not tense in the immediate sense, but stretched, like something waiting to unfold. After a moment, Orven straightened and closed the panel with a soft click. He wiped his hands on his sleeves, then turned fully toward her. "All right," he said. "Let's approach this logically. You were about to kill me." "I was not going to kill you," she interrupted. Orven raised an eyebrow. "You had your teeth out. That does not guarantee death." "That is somehow worse," he said. She ignored the comment. "I was assessing." "Of course you were," Orven muttered. "That's what everyone says." Her expression remained unchanged, but there was a brief pause as if she had considered responding and decided against it. "You carry a symbol that should not be known to your species," she continued. "You do not know its origin. You do not know its meaning." "Correct," Orven said. "We've established that I am not an expert on my own neck." "And yet it is there," she said almost to herself. Orven watched her for a moment, then sighed softly. "Look, I get that this is confusing for you, but from my perspective, this has been a very strange few minutes. I was fixing a panel, and now I'm apparently a historical problem." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You are more than a problem." That is, again, not reassuring. She stepped closer once more, though this time her movements were slower, more deliberate. She stopped just out of reach, her gaze fixed on the mark again. Orven resisted the urge to step back. "If you try that again," he said lightly, "I'm going to assume it's personal." "I will not touch you," she said. "Good," Orven replied. "I prefer my conversations without unexpected biting." Another pause. Then unexpectedly, she spoke again, her voice lower. "I have hunted across 6 star systems," she said. "I have never hesitated." Orven tilted his head. "You're doing a great job now. Very convincing hesitation." Her eyes lifted to meet his. There was something different there now. Not just confusion, but something closer to unease. "This should not be possible," she said. Orven shrugged slightly. "You keep saying that. I'm starting to think you don't like surprises." "I do not like impossibilities," she corrected. "Fair," he said. "They tend to complicate things." She studied him for another long moment, then without warning, turned and began walking down the corridor. Orven blinked. "Oh, we're leaving." She did not stop. "No." He watched her go for a second, then looked around the empty corridor, then back at her retreating figure. "Right," he said, pushing off the wall and following at a cautious distance. Because that made sense. She slowed slightly enough for him to catch up, though she did not look at him. "You should not be alone," she said. Orven glanced at her. "That feels like a threat." "It is not." "Good," he said, "because it sounded like one." Another pause, then he sighed. "So, just to clarify, you're not going to kill me?" "No." "But you're also not going to leave me alone?" "No." Orven nodded slowly. "All right, that's not ideal, but I've had worse arrangements." She did not respond. They walked in silence for a few moments, the station stretching around them in dimly lit corridors and distant mechanical sounds. Orven glanced at her again. "Do you at least have a name? Or should I keep referring to you as the person who almost bit me?" There was a brief hesitation. Then quietly she said, "Mira." Orven nodded. "Orven," he replied. "The person who was almost bitten." "I know," she said. "Of course you do," he muttered. They continued walking, neither entirely sure where they were going, but equally certain that stopping was no longer an option. Orven discovered very quickly that being followed by someone like Mira was not a dramatic experience. It was worse. It was quiet, consistent, and impossible to ignore once you noticed it, which unfortunately he had. He stopped outside the station's small food dispensary, staring at the flickering menu as if it might offer him guidance. "I'm going to eat," he said, not turning around. I am aware, Mira replied from somewhere just behind him. He exhaled slowly. Right, of course you are. Orven stepped forward and tapped the panel, selecting something labeled protein composite with a confidence he did not feel. The machine hummed, processed, and delivered a tray that looked like it had lost an argument with color. He picked it up, turned, and nearly walked into her. Okay, he said, stopping short. We need to establish distance, not metaphorical distance, actual physical distance. Mira tilted her head slightly as if considering the concept. You are not in danger, she said. That is very easy to say when you are not the one who was almost dinner 10 minutes ago. I told you, she replied calmly. I was not going to kill you. Orven glanced down at his tray. I would like you to understand how little that narrows it down. She did not respond. He sighed and gestured toward the seating area. Fine. I'm sitting. You can stand ominously nearby, I guess. I will sit, she said. Orven paused mid-step and looked at her. That somehow makes it worse. Still, he sat, placing the tray down and picking up a utensil that seemed designed to test patience. Mira took the seat across from him with careful precision, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. Orven stared at her for a moment, then he looked at his food, then back at her. You're going to watch me eat? Yes. He nodded slowly. All right, I'll try to make it entertaining. He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and made a face. That is aggressively disappointing. Mira's eyes flicked briefly to the tray. Your food appears inefficient. That's because it is, Orven said. It exists to remind us that we are not on planets anymore. She leaned slightly forward, examining it more closely. It has no scent. That's one of its strongest features, he replied. There was a brief pause. Then unexpectedly, she reached out and touched the edge of the tray. Not the food itself, just the container, as if testing its reality. Orven watched this carefully. If you decide to try it, he said, I will consider that a major cultural exchange. I do not consume such thing, she replied. Lucky you. He took another bite, then gestured vaguely with his utensil. So what exactly are you planning here? You're following me, observing me, occasionally trying not to bite me. Is there a long-term goal, or are we improvising? I am determining the origin of your mark, Mira said, by watching me eat. It is part of a larger assessment. Orven nodded. Of course it is. He leaned back slightly, studying her now. You said you've hunted across 6 star systems? Yes. And you've never hesitated? No. He gestured between them. And now you're sitting across from me while I eat something that barely qualifies as food. She did not respond. That's a big shift, he added. Mira's gaze shifted again to his neck, though more briefly this time, as if the sight of the mark carried weight she was still measuring. It should not exist, she said quietly. Orven exhaled through his nose. You keep saying that. I'm starting to think you're personally offended by it. I am not offended, she replied. Concerned, then. A pause. Yes. He raised an eyebrow. That feels important. She did not elaborate. Orven finished another bite, then set the utensil down, deciding he had reached his limit of bravery for one meal. All right, he said. Let's try something else. You tell me what you think it is. Mira was silent for a moment, her expression tightening slightly, as if the answer itself resisted being spoken. It resembles a symbol from a lineage that predates recorded Vaelthari history, she said slowly, a lineage that was erased. Orven blinked. Erased how? Intentionally. He leaned back further, crossing his arms. That sounds like the kind of thing people do when they don't want questions asked later. Yes. Good, he said. I'm full of questions. She ignored that. It is not a symbol of rank, she continued, nor of ownership. It is... She hesitated. Orven waited. A marker of proximity, she finished. He frowned. Proximity to what? Mira's eyes met his again, and for the first time there was something there that looked almost like uncertainty. That is what I am trying to understand. Orven nodded slowly. All right, that's fair. He glanced down at his tray, then pushed it slightly aside. You know, I was having a very normal day before this. There is nothing normal about you, Mira said. He looked up at her, unimpressed. That is a very strong opinion for someone who met me less than an hour ago. You carry something impossible. And yet here I am, he replied, still eating terrible food. A faint pause followed, and for just a fraction of a second, something shifted in her expression. Not quite amusement, but something close enough to notice. Orven pointed at her. That was almost a reaction. It was not. Very convincing. Silence settled again, though this time it felt less sharp. Orven leaned forward slightly. So what now? Mira considered this. I continue observing you, she said. Of course you do. And I search for answers. He nodded. Right. And what? Just go about my day while being followed by a very serious person who may or may not bite me if she figures something out. Yes, Orven sighed. I was afraid you'd say that. He stood, picking up the tray. Well, Mira, I hope you enjoy watching me do maintenance work, because that's what's next. I will. Of course you will, he muttered. As he turned to leave, he felt her presence shift with him, precise and constant, like a second shadow that refused to detach. Orven glanced over his shoulder. You're really not going anywhere, are you? No? He nodded once. All right. Then he kept walking, with the growing realization that whatever this was, it was not going to resolve itself quickly, and that somehow was the most concerning part of all. Orven had always considered himself a patient man, not exceptionally patient, not impressively calm, just someone who could tolerate inconvenience long enough to fix it or ignore it. That belief began to collapse somewhere between the third time Mira appeared behind him without making a sound, and the moment he realized she had been standing there long enough to observe him failing at the same repair twice. This, Orven said, not turning around as he adjusted the panel again, is not helping. It is not intended to help, Mira replied. That's very clear, he muttered. He tightened a connection, paused, then loosened it again, because it clearly had not deserved that level of commitment. You've been standing there for 12 minutes. 13, she corrected. Orven froze for a second, then slowly turned his head. You counted. Yes. He stared at her. That's not better. Mira stood just inside the maintenance bay, her posture perfectly still, her gaze fixed on him with the same focused intensity that had become increasingly familiar and increasingly uncomfortable. Orven sighed and stepped back from the panel. All right, we need to set boundaries. You have attempted this before, she said. Yes, and I'm trying again. Growth. She tilted her head slightly. Define your boundaries. Orven gestured between them. You cannot appear silently behind me. I did not appear, she replied. I approached. You approached like a ghost with good posture. That is not an accurate classification. It is from my perspective. A brief pause followed, as if Mira was considering whether perspective was relevant. Orven crossed his arms. Also, you cannot watch me work like that. Like what? Like you're waiting for me to become a historical event. Her gaze flicked briefly to his neck. You already are. He closed his eyes for a moment. That was not encouraging. Silence settled again, though it felt less sharp than before. Mira shifted slightly, her attention moving from his face to the surrounding equipment, as if recalibrating her focus. This station is inefficient, she said. Orven opened one eye. That is the nicest thing anyone has ever said about it. The structural design is outdated, she continued. The energy distribution is inconsistent. The systems compensate for failure instead of preventing it. Orven blinked. You just described my entire job. Mira looked at him again. You maintain a failing structure. I prefer gently persuade it not to collapse, he replied. She seemed to consider that. Orven turned back to the panel, though he didn't immediately resume working. You said the mark is older than your records. Yes. And your species, Vaelthari, you keep records. We preserve what is necessary. That sounds selective. It is. Orven nodded slowly. Of course it is. He reached into the panel again, adjusting a series of connections with more confidence this time. So what happens when something doesn't fit those records? Mira was quiet for a moment. It is removed, she said. Orven paused. Removed as in forgotten? or removed as in someone made sure it was forgotten. Her silence was answer enough. He let out a low breath. That's comforting. It maintains stability, she said. Right, Orven replied, because nothing says stable like deleting inconvenient history. Mira's gaze sharpened slightly. You speak as if your species does not do the same. Orven smiled faintly. Oh, we absolutely do. We just pretend we don't. For a brief moment, something shifted in her expression again. Not quite understanding, not quite disagreement. Something in between. Orven leaned back from the panel, satisfied this time when the system remained stable. There, he said, functioning again, temporarily. Mira stepped closer, though still maintaining a measured distance. Her eyes moved over the panel, then back to him. You adapt quickly, she said. Orven shrugged. I fix things that are slightly broken. It's a very specific skill. You are more than that. He gave her a look. You've known me for less than a day. You carry something that should not exist, she said. That changes your classification. Orven raised an eyebrow. I didn't realize I had a classification. You do now. That feels like a downgrade. Mira ignored that. She stepped closer again, her movement slower this time, deliberate. Her gaze shifted once more to his neck, though she did not reach for him. Orven watched her carefully. You're doing the staring thing again. I am analyzing, she replied. You analyzed it already. Not enough. He sighed. Of course not. A moment passed. Then Orven tilted his head slightly. What happens if you figure it out? Mira did not answer immediately. Her expression shifted, subtle but noticeable. I do not know, she said. Orven blinked. That's new. Yes. He nodded slowly. You don't like not knowing things. No. Yeah, he said. I can see that. He pushed himself away from the panel and walked a few steps across the bay, stretching his shoulders slightly. Mira's presence followed, not directly behind him this time, but close enough to remain constant. Orven glanced at her. You're adjusting. In what way? You're not standing directly behind me anymore. She paused. You requested distance. He smiled faintly. I did. Another moment of silence passed, though it felt different now. Less like tension, more like something settling into place. Orven leaned against the wall, studying her. You said you've hunted across 6 systems? Yes. And now you're here, he said. Following me? Yes. He nodded once. That's a strange shift. It is necessary. Because of the mark. Yes. Orven looked down briefly, his fingers brushing lightly against the side of his neck. For something I never cared about, he said. It's causing a lot of problems. Mira's gaze softened slightly, not in warmth, but in focus. It is not a problem, she said. He looked up at her. No? It is a contradiction. Orven let out a small breath. That sounds worse. It is. He considered that for a moment, then nodded. All right. A faint smile touched his expression. Well, Mira, I hope you enjoy contradictions, because it looks like you're stuck with one. She held his gaze for a second longer than necessary. I am beginning to understand that, she said quietly. And for the first time since she had appeared, the silence that followed did not feel like something waiting to break. It felt like something waiting to grow. Orven had come to accept that Mira was not going to leave. Acceptance, however, did not mean understanding, and it certainly did not mean comfort. It mostly meant that he had stopped flinching every time he turned around and found her already there. All right, he said, walking down a narrower corridor that led toward one of the older sections of the station. I'm going to ask a question, and I want you to answer it without sounding like you're explaining the collapse of reality. Mira moved beside him, her pace precise, her presence as steady as the hum of the station. That may not be possible. Try anyway, Orven replied. Why are you still here? She did not answer immediately, which Orven had learned meant the answer would not be simple. Because leaving would be incorrect, she said at last. He nodded slowly. That is exactly the kind of answer I was hoping you would avoid. It is accurate. I don't doubt that, he said. I just don't understand it. They turned a corner, the lighting dimmer here, the walls older, marked with layers of repairs that told stories Orven had never asked about. Mira's gaze moved briefly across the surfaces, as if reading them. The mark you carry, she said, interacts with presence. Orven stopped walking. I'm sorry, what does that mean? She stopped as well, turning slightly toward him. It is not passive. He stared at her. It's a tattoo. It is not only a tattoo. That is becoming increasingly clear, he muttered. Mira stepped closer, though still keeping a measured distance. When I approached you before, she continued, there was a reaction. Orven frowned. From me? No. He blinked. Then from what? She hesitated. The mark, she said. Orven let out a small breath. That's not a sentence I was expecting today. It altered my perception, Mira added. That sounds uncomfortable. It was. Orven crossed his arms, thinking. So you're saying that when you tried to... He gestured vaguely toward his neck. Do the thing. Something stopped you. Yes. And that something was this, he said, tapping lightly at the mark. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, then shook his head slightly. All right, that's new. I don't like that. You should not like it, Mira said. Good, he replied. At least we agree on something. They stood there for a moment, the corridor quiet around them. Then Orven started walking again. So now what? He asked. You stay near me because the tattoo reacts to you? Yes. And you want to... what? Observe it? Yes. He nodded. Right. That makes sense if I don't think about it too much. Mira's gaze shifted briefly to his neck again, then away, as if prolonged focus carried its own risk. There are records, she said after a moment, fragments, in places your kind does not access. Orven glanced at her. That sounds like a problem. It is. I like problems I can fix, he said. This sounds like one I can't. You may be necessary. He stopped again. That is a sentence I would prefer you not repeat casually. Mira regarded him with that same steady focus. Your presence may allow access. Orven raised an eyebrow. Because of the tattoo. Yes. He exhaled slowly. Of course it's because of the tattoo. They continued down the corridor, the air cooler here, the systems older, the station feeling less like a place people lived, and more like something that had been kept running out of habit. After a few steps, Orven spoke again. Let me get this straight, he said. You tried to bite me, failed because of a tattoo I don't understand, and now you think I can help you access forbidden records that your entire species decided to erase. Yes, he nodded once. That is, objectively, a terrible plan. It is the only plan. That makes it worse. Mira did not respond. Orven glanced at her again, studying her expression. You really don't have another option, do you? No, he sighed. Great. I always end up in situations where I'm the only option. It's very inconvenient. They reached a sealed door at the end of the corridor, its surface older than most of the station, its interface dark. Orven frowned. This section's supposed to be inactive. It is not entirely inactive, Mira said. That's comforting, he replied. I love it when things are not entirely inactive. She stepped closer to the door, her gaze focused, her posture shifting slightly. Not tense, but prepared. Orven hesitated, then stepped beside her. So what is this place? He asked. Mira's eyes moved briefly to him, then back to the door. A fragment, she said. Of what? She was quiet for a moment. Of something that should not have remained. Orven let out a soft breath. You really have a way with explanations? He reached out and tapped the panel. Nothing happened. Yeah, he said. That tracks. Mira's gaze shifted to his neck again, more intently this time. Touch it, she said. Orven blinked. The door or the tattoo? The door. That was not clear. Still, he placed his hand against the surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the panel flickered. Orven froze. Oh, that's new. The interface lit up slowly, lines of unfamiliar symbols forming and shifting across the surface, responding to his presence in a way that made no sense. Mira stepped slightly closer, her focus intense. It recognizes you, she said. Orven stared at the panel. I have never been here before. It does not matter. That's not reassuring. The symbols shifted again, aligning into patterns that felt deliberate, ancient. Orven swallowed. So, What exactly did I just do? Mira's voice was quieter now, but steadier. You opened something that should have remained closed. Orven let out a small, nervous laugh. I do that a lot. The door began to unlock with a low, resonant sound. Orven glanced at her. This is the part where you tell me it's safe. Mira did not look away from the door. It is not safe, she said. He nodded once. Of course it isn't. The door slid open slowly, revealing darkness beyond. Not empty, but waiting. Orven took a breath, then stepped back slightly. Well, he said, this feels like a very bad idea. Mira stepped forward. Yes, she said. And then, without hesitation, she entered. Orven stood at the threshold for a second longer than he intended, staring into the darkness beyond the open door, like it might politely explain itself if given enough time. It did not. It simply waited, which he found deeply suspicious. All right, he said, glancing at Mira's back as she moved inside without hesitation. Just so we're clear, this is exactly how terrible decisions begin. She did not stop. Your presence is required. That is not comforting, he replied, stepping forward anyway, because staying outside felt somehow worse. The moment he crossed the threshold, the air changed. Not colder, not warmer, just different. The hum of the station faded behind him, replaced by a quieter, deeper resonance, like a structure that had been holding its breath for a very long time. Okay, Orven muttered, looking around. I don't like this already. The space inside was not large, but it felt expansive in a way that didn't match its physical dimensions. The walls curved slightly, smooth and seamless, with faint lines etched across them, patterns that didn't quite register as decoration or function. Mira moved slowly now, her steps measured, her attention sharp. This place is older than the station, she said. Orven blinked. That seems like something that should have been mentioned earlier. It was not necessary. It feels necessary now. He took a few cautious steps forward, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. As he moved, something flickered along the walls, subtle at first, like a reflection that didn't belong. Orven stopped. Did you see that? Yes. Good, he said. I was hoping it wasn't just me. The flickering grew stronger, the faint lines along the walls beginning to glow with a soft, shifting light. Symbols, if they were symbols, emerged from the surface, forming patterns that felt structured, deliberate. Orven stared at them. I don't recognize any of this. You should not, Mira said. That's becoming a theme. She stepped closer to one of the walls, her gaze fixed on the glowing patterns. This is not Vaelthari design. Orven raised an eyebrow. That sounds important. It is. He glanced around again. So if it's not yours and it's definitely not ours? Her silence filled in the rest. Great, he said. Mysterious third option. Love those. The light shifted again, brighter now, responding to something unseen. Orven felt a faint pressure at the back of his neck. Not pain, but awareness, like something noticing him in return. He reached up instinctively, his fingers brushing against the tattoo. The reaction was immediate. The symbols flared, the light intensifying, spreading across the walls in expanding patterns that moved with a kind of logic he couldn't follow. Orven jerked his hand away. Okay, that's definitely me. Mira turned sharply toward him, her expression focused, almost alarmed. Do not withdraw. I wasn't planning to, he said, but I'd like to understand why touching my own neck is suddenly a bad idea. It is not the contact, she said. It is the interruption. That clears nothing up. The light pulsed again, slower this time, as if adjusting. Mira stepped closer to him, her gaze fixed not on his face, but on the mark itself. Allow it, she said. Orven hesitated. That sounds like something people say right before something goes wrong. Nothing here is functioning without you, she replied. That is also concerning. Still, he lowered his hand, letting the strange sensation settle. The pressure at the back of his neck returned. Stronger now, but not painful. More like a pull, a connection forming. The symbols shifted again, reorganizing, aligning into clearer structures. Orven squinted. Are those words? They are not a language you know, Mira said. Good, he replied. I was worried I'd have to read them. She ignored that, stepping closer to the wall. Her hand hovered just above the surface, not touching, as if aware that contact might change something. "This is a record," she said. "Of what?" Her eyes moved across the patterns, following their flow. "Of convergence." Orven frowned. "That's vague." "It is precise," she replied. "That's worse." The light shifted again, forming a central pattern that drew both of their attention. It was different from the others, more complex, more defined. Mira's expression changed, not confusion, recognition. "No," she said quietly. Orven glanced at her. "That's not a reassuring reaction." She stepped closer to the wall, her focus narrowing. "This should not exist." "Again with that," he said. "You're starting to sound repetitive." She ignored him, her gaze fixed on the central pattern. "It is not a symbol of dominance," she said, more to herself now, "nor of lineage." Orven crossed his arms. "You mentioned that before." Her eyes flicked to him, sharp. "It is not what we were taught." He blinked. "All right, what is it then?" She hesitated. Then slowly she said, "It is a marker of alignment." Orven frowned. "Alignment with what?" Mira looked at him, and for the first time, there was something in her expression that felt less controlled. "Not a hierarchy," she said. "A connection." Orven was quiet for a moment. "Connection between who?" She turned back to the wall. "Between those who stand between," she said. He stared at her. "That is the least clear explanation you've given so far." The light pulsed again, stronger now, responding to something neither of them fully understood. Orven shifted slightly, the sensation at his neck intensifying. "Okay," he said. "I think it likes me being here, which I'm not sure how to feel about." "It is responding to you," Mira said. "Yes, we've established that." Her gaze moved back to him, more focused now. "You are not carrying a relic," she said. Orven raised an eyebrow. "No." "You are carrying a function." He stared at her. "That sounds significantly worse." Before she could respond, the light surged. The patterns expanded, the room itself seeming to react, the walls shifting with a low, resonant sound. Orven took a step back. "That's new." "It is activating," Mira said. "Of course it is," he muttered. The central pattern brightened, forming a shape that was no longer abstract. It matched the mark on his neck. Orven stared at it. "I don't like that." Mira did not respond. Her gaze was fixed, intense, as if she were seeing something far beyond the immediate moment. "This was not erased," she said quietly. "It was hidden." Orven glanced at her. "That feels like an important distinction." "It changes everything." He let out a small breath. "That seems to be happening a lot today." The light pulsed again, softer now, as if stabilizing. Orven looked around, then back at Mira. "So, what now?" She was silent for a moment, then she said, "Now we understand what should not have been forgotten." Orven nodded slowly. "Great." He looked at the glowing patterns again, then back at her. "I have a feeling," he added, "that this is not going to make things simpler." Mira met his gaze, her expression steady again, but not unchanged. "No," she said, "it will not." And for once, Orven didn't try to argue. The light did not fade when it stabilized. It settled. Orven stood in the center of the room, the glow from the walls reflecting faintly across his skin, as if the space had decided to acknowledge him and was now unwilling to stop. The symbol on the wall, his symbol, remained clear, steady, no longer shifting or searching. "Well," he said after a moment, "this is new. Usually when something recognizes me, it's because I forgot to pay a maintenance request." Mira did not respond immediately. Her gaze moved across the patterns, slower now, deliberate, like she was reading something that had once been erased and was now returning piece by piece. "It is complete," she said. Orven glanced at her. "That's a strong word." "It is no longer fragmented," she corrected. "That's slightly less intimidating." He shifted his weight, the sensation at his neck still present, but no longer pulling, more like a quiet connection, something steady instead of urgent. "I don't feel like I opened something dangerous," he said. "I feel like I opened something that was waiting." Mira turned to him. That is more accurate, she said. Orven nodded slowly. Good. I prefer weighting things over dangerous things. They are not always different. Of course they aren't, he muttered. He stepped closer to the wall, studying the symbol that matched his own. It no longer felt strange in the same way. Not foreign, just larger than he had understood. My grandfather knew, he said quietly. Mira watched him. Yes. He didn't tell me. No. Orven let out a soft breath. That feels unfair. It may have been necessary. That also feels unfair. He reached up, touching the mark again, this time without hesitation. The light responded, but gently, like a system acknowledging input rather than reacting to it. I spent my whole life thinking this was nothing, he said. Just a story he didn't bother finishing. Mira stepped closer, her voice steady. It was not a story. No, Orven said. It wasn't. He lowered his hand, his gaze still on the symbol. So what does it mean? Really? Mira was silent for a moment, then spoke carefully. It means you are not outside the history you were never told, she said. You are part of what was hidden from both of us. Orven smiled faintly. That's a very complicated way of saying I've been involved in something without my permission. Yes. Great. He turned slightly, looking at her now. And you? Mira held his gaze. I was taught that my kind stood above others, she said, that we were defined by what came before us. Orven raised an eyebrow. And now? She glanced at the symbol, then back at him. Now I see that what came before was not hierarchy, she said. It was connection. Orven nodded once. That sounds healthier. It is. Destabilizing, she replied. Yeah, he said, but in a good way. A brief silence followed, though it no longer felt uncertain. Orven stepped back, looking around the room one last time. The light remained steady, the patterns no longer shifting, as if their purpose had been fulfilled. So, he said, we found the hidden thing, confirmed that history is incomplete, and discovered that I'm apparently a walking key to something very old. Yes, he nodded. All right. Mira watched him closely. You are not reacting as expected. He shrugged slightly. I don't know what the expected reaction is. Fear, resistance. Orven considered that. I was afraid earlier, he said, when you tried to bite me. I did not. You absolutely did, he interrupted. A brief pause. Continue, she said. He smiled faintly. Now it's different. Why? Orven gestured around them. Because this isn't about something chasing me anymore. It's about something I'm part of. Mira studied him, her expression quieter now, more reflective. You have accepted it, she said. I wouldn't go that far, Orven replied. I've stopped arguing with it. That is similar. Not quite, he said, but close enough. He turned toward the open doorway, the corridor beyond visible again. The normal world waiting just outside the edge of something ancient. Well, he said, we should probably go back before the station notices we've been gone and decides to create new problems. Mira did not move immediately. Orven glanced at her. You're thinking? Yes. That's usually where things get complicated. She stepped closer to him, her gaze steady. I will not leave, she said. Orven blinked. I had a feeling that was coming. This changes everything I was taught, she continued. I need to understand it. He nodded. And I'm the only person with the inconvenient tattoo. Yes. Orven sighed, though there was no real frustration in it. All right. He started toward the door, then paused, looking back at the room one last time. This place, he said, it's not going anywhere, is it? No. Good, he replied, because I feel like we're going to need it again. Mira stepped beside him, close enough now that her presence no longer felt like a threat. Just present. They walked out together. The door remained open behind them, the light within steady, quiet, no longer hidden. As they stepped back into the corridor, the familiar hum of the station returned. Grounding, ordinary. Orven glanced at her. So, he said, what happens now? Mira met his gaze. We continue, she said. He smiled slightly. Of course we do. They stood there for a moment, neither rushing forward, neither stepping back. The weight of what they had uncovered settling into something that felt less like an ending and more like a beginning. Orven adjusted his collar, then added almost casually, "Next time, though, maybe we start with the conversation instead of the almost biting." Mira considered that. "Perhaps," she said. Orven nodded. "Progress." And together they walked forward, not as hunter and prey, not as question and answer, but as two parts of a story that had finally remembered itself.